Hello world of YouTube and welcome to my Primus Reformatted Discography review. Primus, one of my favorite bands, if you've seen my favorite bands of all time video, so you know I love a lot of their catalog. They got some really good stuff in their midst, but before I get into we're breaking down the discography, I want to say if you want to see my extended cut of this, where I talk a little bit more about my history with the band and all that sort of stuff, talking about how my feelings have grown, the Patreon cut is linked in the description. It actually came out last year. Is one of my catch-up reviews that I did at the end of last year. So, if you want to see that, it's a link down there. But today, I'm going to be breaking down all 10, yes 10, of their records. I'm going to be talking about that one. But before I get into those, let's talk about their 3 EPs that are worth a damn right now. Now, 2 of their EPs are pretty much just covers projects where they get to cover a lot of bands that they are influenced by. And the first one they did came out in 1992, and it was called Miscellaneous Debris. And it's a really good covers EP. The songs that they chose make a lot of sense. The Peter Gabriel and the Pink Floyd stuff tie into their more proggier roots, whereas XTC ties more into their just weird side. You know, and the songs that they chose are really good. I like Making Plans for Nigel a lot. I think Have a Cigar really fits their vibe. And I like what they do with their songs to make them fit more into the more darker edge that Primus likes to toy with. I think this EP is pretty damn good. I don't think it's their best out of the 2 covers EPs. I like Rhinoplasty a little more. But I feel like if you enjoy Primus and you kind of want to hear their spins on some songs that may have influenced them as a band, this isn't a bad EP to check out, in my opinion. Now, I like Rhinoplasty more because it's a little more dynamic. While Miscellaneous Debris does a lot of the funk and darkness and really darker edge that Primus' sound toys with and did a lot so at the time that it was released, Rhinoplasty shows their growth as a band. They still have some sinister stuff, like their Thing That Should Not Be cover, which is incredible. I love using Les's bass to make it heavier. It sounds incredible. The stomp on that fucking slays. And it kind of fits the sort of songwriting styles that Les kind of leans with. Thing That Should Not Be is kind of a Cthulhu-esque, you know, Lovecraftian dark song. And they write about fish in the water a lot. So it makes sense, and I like that cover. I love the guitar twinge on their Police cover. I like that they kept twang on Amos Moses, and they kept it really laid back and funky on Silly Putty. This just feels like a more dynamic covers record. It shows Primus sort of flexing their musical chops a little better, and that's why I like it more. And I think that it shows their talents a lot better than Miscellaneous Debris did. Not that, again, Miscellaneous Debris isn't bad, and I feel like if you like Primus, again, it's a worthwhile listen, but I feel like out of the 2, I much prefer Rhinoplasty's brand of covers and sounds that they explore on there. I just think that it's more interesting of a listen to me personally. Now, their only EP of solely original material was Animals Should Not Try to Act Like People, which came out in 2003 and saw the return of Tim Alexander behind the kit, who was the original drummer for the band, who left after Tales for the Punchbowl, and then came back, and then left again. And I think he's back in the band now. I don't know. Tim is the drummer who's had, I think, the longest tenure with the band. And I love him. I love his drum playing style. I think he does fit really well with Larry and Les's playing, and he creates a really good backbeat. And I like this EP a lot. I love a lot of what this this EP has going on. Even though they're playing with longer song lengths, like this is a much more progressive Primus release. Most of the tracks crawl over the 5-minute, really reaching in the 6-7 minute mark, but they do a lot of cool jammy stuff with that time, like on My Friend Fat's the closer, which has a lot of sparse playing, but kind of builds up throughout the track, evolving into a much more intricate, nuanced piece that I think is great, and kind of, again, acts as sort of another one of Les's character portrayals that he does incredibly well. The Carpenter and the Dainty Bride is something a little similar, but it's a little more on the forefront of its playing. It's a little more progressive in that regard. This is a really cool EP. It's got a lot of really cool stuff in it. You know, I feel like it acts as a weird sort of blip between Antipop's collaborative focused sound and their comeback in 2011. This was really the only thing they dropped in the 2000s, and it acts as sort of an interesting slice of their sound because it sounds more like a melding of the production from Antipop with a lot more of the spatial aspects of that record explored more, and I think it's cool. I think it's a cool-ass EP where the guys kind of bounce off each other really well. It's a nice sort of, again, offshoot to get into if your interest is piqued. If you like some of the more progressive sounds on like the Desaturating Seven or on Green Naugahyde, but you want to hear it with the production of Antipop, I would listen to this EP. It's pretty cool. I think it's worth your time. I think it's really great. Some of the tracks are a little too short. Like Pilcher Squad really is one that just feels like a really weird interlude that I wish was a little bit longer. It's sort of in the vein of like a Southington Willoughby from Frizzle Fry. It just feels like sort of a nothing song. But the most of what's here is worth your time, in my opinion. Now let's get into their albums proper. So I did a podcast comparing this Willy Wonka covers record to Danny Elfman's covers, or like tribute remake of the soundtrack in a podcast last year, comparing which one was worse, because both of them are very bad. And if you want to listen to that podcast, it's linked on screen now and in the description. But I don't like this thing. It's the one slice of Primus's discography that I really don't like. I think it's really bad. Like, there's elements I like. There's attributes that I enjoy. I just think that they try too hard at points to inject their sort of dark quirkiness that Primus is known for into tracks. Like, Cheer Up Charlie doesn't need to sound like that. The Candyman isn't as good as it sounds like it would be. The best parts of this record are the Oompa Loompa songs, which I think they pull together pretty well, and it kind of matches their sound pretty well. And I think the Pure Imagination's pretty dope. I like their version of Pure Imagination, and I like that they have Lermaninoff in here to lead into it. It's just a nice little touch from the movie into the record. You know, Willy Wonka is my favorite musical. I fucking love Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. I think it's a great film. I think that the music is incredible, and the story behind the music is really cool, like how the musical was written, how the songs were written in conjunction with the movie. But this record fails in sounding completely well indebted to the source material. You know, they try too hard to make it Primacy, and while that sounds like it'd be a match made in heaven, you know, the aesthetic and the sound of Willy Wonka and Primus' sound and aesthetic, it feels like it would work so well, but they try too hard and overstep too far on a handful of instances. And I just think that it's a weird thing that exists out there. It's the one Primus record I forget about half the time, because like when I think about Primus, even their newest record, the Desaturating Seven, I was like, oh yeah, that's their newest record. Oh yeah, they did a Willy Wonka covers record, and it's not good. The production's weird at points. It's just not a fun thing that I feel like really anybody should get to. And maybe it's my Willy Wonka bias playing into it, but this just ain't it, Chief. I think that they could have done a lot better in executing this project. I feel like, listen to the Pure Imagination cover, maybe the Loompa stuff if it piques your interest, but other than that, leave it in the past. You know, the Pure Imagination is the beacon of light in this entire project as a whole. And their most recent record, the Desaturating Seven, is better, if only because instead of being bad, it's more kind of boring. And it kind of showcases that Primus just don't do whole concept records well. This record's based on an Italian children's book about these goblins that like steal color. Feels very Primus, like as far as the concept, and less wanting to write a record about that. And there's elements I like that feel very prog in a different way for Primus, and I think that in itself is at least more interesting than a Willy Wonka concept record, because they're really doubling down on the prog-ass aspect of writing a concept record. You know, a lot of the songs on here are very lengthy, and they try to do a lot of like progressive passages and I can commend that. Do I think they all come together? Not quite. You know, tracks like The Dream, which feel like a fusion of like King Crimson and Pink Floyd, dreariness, doesn't do a whole lot with its runtime. The Seven, the lead single for this project, feels a little more in line with like King Crimson infused with Rush. The build-up in the chorus for that feels very Rush-esque, and I love that for it. Aspects of the Trek feel very similar, infusing that kind of King Crimson Rush's sound. King Crimson feels like a huge influence across this project as a whole, which, given how some of their early work sounds, that makes a lot of sense, and I like that they're tapping more into that progressive side, and I hope that if they decide to put out another record post this, it's not just a concept record, so they can go back to writing a bunch of weird songs using that sound, but I feel like because they tried to pull together the very prog ideas with creating a concept record, it makes a record that, by the by, just isn't holistically interesting. There's good playing on here. I love the bass work on The Storm, and on The Scheme, and again on the tracks that I've already mentioned, like The Seven and The Trek. There's a lot of tight musicianship here. You know, Tim, while he was on the last record, he really gets to play on this record, and I love that. I think Larry has some good guitar textures that are here. Like, I love the sounds on The Dream. I just wish they did more with them. And The Storm is kind of something of a similar ilk. It's a really cool song. They just don't do a whole lot with it. You know, and that's kind of the biggest takeaway from this project is it's the most disappointing because it had the most promise. You know, while Willy Wonka was sort of a weird sort of tribute, you know, an adaptation of an existing musical, this is just a full concept record from Primus. And that sounds like a cool idea. This had so much good going for it, and yet it underperformed across the board. I feel like this is a good point of interest, of curiosity for diehard fans, or if you've listened to the discography and you want to give this a shot, you may enjoy it more than I do. I feel like even prog heads aren't going to walk away from this project liking as much as they would maybe from even their other late career records like Green Naugahyde or Antipop. You know, they have musings of greatness on here, but it just across the board isn't very great. Point of curiosity, it's fine. It's the most fine Primus has ever gotten. You know, while Willy Wonka is the worst, this is the most mediocre thing the band has pulled together in their entire career, which is saying something because they've been around for a while and they have some records that I'm sure someone would hate more than this, but I personally just think it's not it, man, and it sucks to say that. So even with this being this low, I actually really like Antipop. I'm sure there's some in the Primus camp that think that this record sucks. They had too many cooks in the kitchen on this project. It feels very reminiscent of like the last most recent Foo Fighters record, Concrete and Gold, because there's people in here all over the place. You know, you got Jim Martin from Faith No More and James Hetfield both doing guitars on Eclectic Electric. Tom Morello does guitars on Electric Uncle Sam. You know, Tom Waits is on this record on a couple of tracks. They have a lot going on in this project, but I feel like for Primus to close out the decade that they had the most prominence, this feels like a celebration of all that they had done. You know, they have stuff on here that feels very reminiscent of a lot of what they were doing in this decade, and I feel like it comes together incredibly well. Whether you have the more straightforward, kind of funk-driven, typical Primus songs like the Antipop, or Greet the Sacred Cow, or Ballad of Bodacious, you have the dark character vignettes like Lockerhead and Natural Joe. You have the prog-centric stuff like Final Voyage with the Liquid Sky and Eclectic Electric that feel more like an extension from Tales from the Punchbowl. You have the political stuff, which Primus has kind of done all over the map, like Electric Uncle Sam. You know, this record feels like a celebration of Primus's accomplishments, and I feel like it comes across pretty solidly. I think a lot of the collaborations come together pretty well. I think it's weird that they had Matt Stone produce a track on here, which again is another cook in the kitchen. You know, they have a lot going on in this project, but it doesn't feel like it's detracting from Primus as a concept, as a band. And I think that even though it is this low on the list because they have a lot of quality releases under their belt, this is worth your time. If you enjoy, you know, if you enjoy records like the Brown Album, or you like aspects of records like Pork Soda and Frizzle Fry, you would like this. The production is very beefy. It feels very 1999. The guitars have a huge ring to them. The drums are very pounding, and Les's bass pops in a way that's very different from the rest of their catalog. But I think it works. For the sound and the vibe that they're going for on here, it works. I also really like that they have a studio version of a live staple, the Heckler, on here as well, and I think that that is a nice little sort of send-off and tribute to that era of Primus as well. You know, I would have preferred it to have been Ja Like It, because I like Ja Like It more, but it's cool to see the Heckler get its time on record, you know? This just, again, it's a love letter, I feel like, in a way that some fans appreciate, like me, but I can see some people in the Primus fandom not enjoying this record. I don't really know the general consensus. I don't really know a lot of Primus fans, especially ones as intense into the band as I am, but I feel like I could understand people's qualms with this record, especially on the production front, but I like it. I like it a lot. I feel like it's a good stepping stone record in their career. It's not a good place to start, but it's a good place to get to, if you ask me. Their original comeback album, Green Naugahyde, I'm putting next in the ranking because while it has some more production issues than Antipop, some of the production on here is a little inconsistent. A lot of the writing across the board feels more in line with Golden Age Primus, and this feels like a great comeback for them. And it's actually an interesting point in their discography as well, because their original drummer, Jay Lane, who was in Primus before they were Primus, it's a point that I'll get to in this video. He was a part of the That record that I mentioned in the beginning. His drumming is a little different than Herb's as far as like the two early drummers that the band had in their career. But also great in his own regard. He has a lot more flair with some of his flourishments in ways that are different than Herb's. Their fill work is very different, and I feel like that aspect is very crucial to funk, how you can improvise in a pocket, and he still fits very well with Les and Larry's playing. He's a very talented drummer, and I like his playing on here a lot, honestly. And as for the songs themselves, like I said, there's a lot of tracks on here that feel less like a celebration of Primus and more of an embracing of what drew people to them to begin with. You know, tracks like the Hennepin Crawler, Last Salmon Man, Jilly's on Smack especially. Jilly's on Smack, it was immediately like a top-tier Primus song to me. I love the ambience in that track, that very foreboding drone that's in the track while Jay and Larry just kind of dance around in the cut, and Les, you know, just tells a really dark character piece. That feels like Golden Age Primus just channeled so very well. But the tracks I mentioned before, More on TV, also has sort of that same socio, you know, conceptual or conscious stuff. They also have their more politically leaning stuff like they do from time to time, like Eternal Consumption Engine or Hoeing for the Man, which is about just putting in all your work, selling your soul to the man. And Eternal Consumption Engine is about production. The whole mantra of everything's made in China is kind of channeled in this track, talking about going for locally sourced goods, you know? Again, in a very socio-political sort of way. The Last Salmon Man's another fisherman track. Again, it has a lot of the Primusisms that you would want from a comeback from them, and I feel like sticks the landing pretty well on this project. Like I said up at the top, though, the production on this record is a little inconsistent. Some of the bass on here, while I love Les's bass, the production on it on some tracks, like Lee Van Cleef, just isn't good. Like, it isn't consistent either. Because I like the bass production on Hennepin Crawler and Tragedies A Comin', you know, and again, that low drone in Jilly's on Smack. But the production across the board is a lot more inconsistent than any other Primus record. Like, even the stuff that comes after this feels more consistently produced than this. And I feel like that holds it back a lot. I feel like if it had a remaster, it would, to kind of make it a little more consistent across the board, it would be a little better as a result, because the production has points where it feels like Primus, and stuff where it feels like less is solo work in a weird way. I don't know, I feel like I talked about that in my original review of this record, but I love this record still. I just have issues with some parts of it, behind the scenes wise. The writing across the board is really good, though. A lot of the tracks really hit. There's some, especially in the tail end, that I don't like as much as others, but it's still a very solid entry. I feel like if you like Tales from the Punchbowl, or you like Pork Soda, and you want to see like just a new, fresh Primus record that takes some of the sonic ideas from their Animals Should Not Try to Act Like People EP that came out in the 2000s, I would listen to this, because it kind of picks their sound up back where they left off, did a little bit with it, and then pieced out. It's a cool-ass release that I really enjoy. So if Primus were to have an underrated record in their catalog, I would wager the Brown Album is that. You know, it's a record that I loved a lot when I was in high school. I revisited this as much as I did their like early work. I held it to the same caliber. And while I still think a lot of the songwriting is up to snuff with that in a lot of different ways, and I love the sonic experimentations that they do on this record that I'll get to in a minute, there's one issue with this record that I've had, the older that I've gotten, that completely holds it back to me and almost put it below Green Naugahyde. Because while Green Naugahyde had inconsistent production, the Brown Album has just outright awful production. The production on this record is abhorrent. The drums throughout the entire record audibly clip throughout the entire runtime. There's like the drums themselves just have this poor production to them that sets it down so far. And it's kind of a disservice, because this is the first album with Brian Mantra on drums, and he does a great job. I like his drumming. I think that he's a very good drummer. And the production just did him dirty. You know those points where the bass and guitars also clip, like on Golden Boy or on Coddingtown? But across the board, the drums suck on this record production-wise. They're great from a musicianship perspective, but the production is just awful. But like I said, this record is actually really good from a songs themselves perspective. You know, I really like the opener, The Return of Sothington Willoughby, which is like a sequel to a track, like a interlude track from Frizzle Fry, and it's this long, elongated political speech from the perspective of this character, and it's done so well. And I love the sort of noodling that the band does and the groove that's there between his speeches. And it kind of is a great intro for this record. I love it on here, and it kind of leads really well into Fisticuffs, into like giving you an actual initial groove to go with on this project. And the whole vibe of this record just has this sort of different characteristic than the earlier work, you know? I like the experimentation on the waltzy Over the Falls that's on here, or the swing that's on Kalamazoo. That just is a vibe that Primus never really fully embraced like this. The funk on Shake Hands with Beef feels like an expansion on their earlier funk roots, and it's really cool. And again, the sort of tongue-in-cheek songwriting that Primus are known for on a track like Shake Hands with Beef. You know, they have that fun party groove on Bob's Party Time Lounge that feels like an expansion on Tales from the Punchbowl. They're doing expansions on this record. That production just holds it back so far. But I feel like if you can sit through it, it's a great record. It's a good experience to have. A lot of cool stuff on here. I feel like if you want a good follow-up to Tales from the Punchbowl, this is that. You know, while Antipop is a great celebration of Primus, this is a good sort of little offshoot from Tales from the Punchbowl that they wouldn't necessarily do in the same way on Green Naugahyde. You know, I like this record a lot for the same reasons as Green Naugahyde, but its setbacks are just as far. I just feel like this record as a whole is more consistent song-wise than Green Naugahyde, which is why I put it above it. Because there's so many cool tracks on here, man. A lot of good grooves, a lot of good guitar lines, good drum lines. The bass work is, of course, incredible. It's just set back by that damn production. Now, that album I keep hinting at throughout the early part of this review, this is that album. This is the Primus, before they were Primus band Sausage. It has Les, it has Jay Lane, who is in Green Naugahyde, but it doesn't have Larry. LeLonde's guitars aren't on this project. Instead, Todd Huth is the guitarist on this project, and he has a completely different flavoring to the guitars. You know, they're still very funky. The drums, when they are propulsive on tracks like Prelude to Fear or Shattering Song or the version of Toys Go Winding Down that's on this project, are very, like, fast funk, but Todd's guitars also have this completely different flavoring to it that presents a vibe that still feels very Primus-y, but I feel like they definitely got nailed down more when Larry joined the band. No disrespect to Todd. He's a great player. I like a lot of the hazy guitar playing that's on tracks like Here's to the Man or Girls for the Single Man, which Girls for the Single Man feels very much like Spaghetti Western from Frizzle Fry, where Les is just doing this like spoken word, like talking shit that he did a lot in the early days, which I'm cool with. I like that. Again, that's why I like Sothington Willoughby, the Return of Sothington Willoughby from the Brown album, because it's just weird talking over this funky ass instrumental. It's fucking cool. This feels like Primus 1.0 or like Alpha. It feels like, again, there's a version of Toys Go Winding Down, one of my favorite tracks from Frizzle Fry on here, and it sounds completely different than the version that ended up on Frizzle Fry. So this is such a cool little piece of Primus history. And the weirder thing about it is that while these songs were created in the 80s, this wasn't released until 1994, when Primus was knee-deep in their, you know, pilgrimage through the 90s. And they did like a little circuit around that time with this band. It was a weird time, but it's a cool record, and I like it above the stuff that I've already mentioned because I like early Primus, and this is like a different version of early Primus, because the guitars, again, have this completely different style to them that feels a little more jittery at points. You know, one of the things I love about Lair's guitar playing is that not only does he do really cool ambient sort of the bass to the backup to Les's lead, he can shred and do some really cool solo work. And there's glimpses of that on here, but it's definitely not to the same capacity that Lair is. But there's still a lot of cool stuff here. I love the sort of false start to Riddles Are Abound Tonight, the title track. I think that it, again, has that very Primus feel to it. I love the groove on that track as well. I love the delivery of a lot. It's not like the production on this, too. It has that same sort of raw power that early Primus, especially Frizzle Fry, had. It feels like, again, an offshoot version of Frizzle Fry. And I really like it for that. I think it's a cool little offshoot experiment. Jay's drums, again, have that same flavor that they did on Green Naugahyde, but in sort of an earlier raw Genesis. In fact, if you like Frizzle Fry or Green Naugahyde, this is a cool thing to check out, because it has a very different flavor with the same type of sheen to it. You know, this is definitely at least a point of curiosity for Primus fans. If you've never listened to this, if you're like a regular Primus fan, if not like a diehard and you've never listened to this before, give it a spin. It's cool. It's cool to hear this project. It's cool to hear Les, and again, an early version of Primus sort of toying with cool ideas of what would become a band like Primus. Yeah, it's a cool little point of interest for sure. Definitely why I like it more than the other stuff, because it's at least more interesting than some of those other records, you know? And again, the production's not terrible. I don't know what I should do. This is that golden age shit. This is that top tier Primus, my guys. Tales from the Punchbowl is peak Primus firing off on all cylinders. They do a great job at expanding on the darker sound scene on Pork Soda and some of the other more lighthearted funky grooves from Salem the Seeds of Cheese incredibly well, like on Mrs. Bylene, which is a darkly written track about a teacher that mind controls their children. Southbound Pachyderm is about poaching, and it's this dark, foreboding funk jam. You know, Hellbound 17 and a half has that same kind of dark edge sonically. On the Tweak again, you could kind of guess what that's about given the, you know, drug stuff that Les has written about both before and after this. But there's also tracks like Year of the Parrot and Glass Sandwich and Del Davis Tree Farm that also just kind of expand upon those sounds and just present them wholly once again. But there's also some cool sonic experimentations on this project, like Space Farm, which has this is like a trippy sort of interlude track that pairs really well with Over the Electric Grapevine, which is like a pure Floydian, psychedelic, embellished prog jam that the band plays off incredibly well and would lead probably to their more progressive sounding tracks that they would do even to their last record. You know, their very, very proggy side starts to bleed out on this record, and I'm fine with that because I like Primus doing prog shit. But they also have a tribute to Les's High School with the Deanza Jig, which has some banjo on it. They have Winona's Big Brown Beaver, one of their most popular songs out there that has this country twang to it, and it's also filthy as fuck. And also the opener, Professor Nut About His House Treats, a great jam that has just this elongated jam-like feel with this groove at its core that the band just kills for the entire runtime. I love this record. You know, I'm putting it here because while it's not as weird, or at least not as like underwhelming as a lot of the stuff beneath it, Sausage aside, it's not to the same caliber that the next leg of records, that the rest of the records I'm going to talk about have, because this is a great record, and it's a good point to get to eventually. Like, this is a good stepping stone record, just generally. While I've talked about listening to Sausage if you like this, or listening to this other record if you like, or listening to Green Naugahyde if you like this, this is a place to get to just in general. You know, if you're liking Frizzle Fry and Seas of Cheese and Pork Soda, and you want to hear just more peak Primus done incredibly well, listen to Tales from the Punchbowl. It's a classic in their catalog. It is them just excelling at what they do best, and them writing some incredibly tight jams. I love this record. I don't think I talked about that enough in my original review, but I love this record a lot, and I feel like it's still definitely worth your time.
Welcome to this world.
Pork Soda, it's just another great Primus record. These next three records are going to be so hard to talk about, but I feel like it, in tandem with the other two, are sort of essential listening with this band, you know, because it saw them taking some of the sort of relatively foreboding tones seen on Seas of Cheese and on Frizzle Fry, that dark edge that was there, and the use of Les's character vignettes, and just made it even darker, like grim, morbid, sinister. You know, My Name is Mud, for as lumbering as that groove is. It's a track about a dude that kills people. You know, there's a track like Bob that is about a dude that killed himself with a belt in his apartment. You know, The Pressmen, a track that would be in live circulation for them for years before ending up on here, makes sense on this record because it's, again, a little more of a darker leaning song. The air is getting slippery. Another dark twinge song. While not everything on here is dark, there's just a lot more of it in heavy potency than on the last two records, or even on the records to follow. It's an interesting point in their discography that I really enjoy. But there's also just the same tongue-in-cheek Primusness. Nature Boy is about masturbation. Tracks like Hamburger Train and Wounded Knee are instrumental tracks. You know, not everything on here is super dark, but it's definitely the darkest release in Primus's catalog. But it's still great. The production on here, and again, the Les's bass seems to rumble a lot on here more to lend to that dark feel. You know, the drums, the low end on the drums kind of punches more to kind of lend to that darker feel. There's just a darker edge to this record that I actually really, really enjoy. And again, this is pretty much a perfect record. Like, I love this album, and I love, like, it's one of those records that when I was getting into Primus more, I just kept cycling back to because I loved the sounds on here. Honestly, out of the three earlier run records, this is not my favorite production, but it's up there for one of my favorite produced records. You know, I think that it's definitely the cleanest they've gotten so far, and I think it's really great. And again, I feel like if you're getting into Primus, this is essential listening, because it puts that dark edge that coated the early materials and coats the later materials with Les's writing, and much more the forefront, and shows you how dark the band can really get lyrically. You know, they even write a song about the DMV. The worst fucking place to be. Of course it would end up on a record like Pork Soda. It's classic to me, and again, essential listening if you're getting into Primus. And Sailing the Seas of Cheese is also just a great fucking record that saw them just cleaning up Frizzle Fry's production. You know, the production on this record might be my favorite. I don't know, I really like Frizzle Fry's production. Clearly that's my #1 pick. But Sailing the Seas of Cheese is just them spreading their wings a little more. You know, there's more interludes on here. At least there's more weirder offshoots on here, like the intro or Grandpa's little ditty. You know, but they sandwich those around, or they place those, disperse those amongst just classic Primus jam after Primus jam. You know, Here Come the Bastards and Damn Blue Collar Tweakers with their sort of cyclical based rhythms for Les to just build upon lyrically. Tracks like Sergeant Baker and American Life, laying more into the sort of socio-political stuff. American Life being about like how shitty the American dream really can be. You know, Jerry Was a Race Car Driver is probably one of the most quintessential Primus jams, with that bass line and a track that builds up to this race car driver having died in a car accident. You know, a track, one of the more proggier tracks early on, Is It Luck, is written in like a weird time signature.
11 is the song I was thinking of, but Is It Luck does have a weird zany bass line that I don't think is in 4/4 either. But 11 is in a weird fucking time signature.
At least weird for like regular rock music. Tommy the Cat's another sort of classic Primus jam that I think has Tom Waits on the vocals, that is just playing the character of this cat and laying out his... It's just a character piece, you know? Again, classic Primus on here. I didn't mention it on Pork Soda, but the Sturgill, or the Bluegill Sturgill track, Fish On is on here. Fish jams, The Ocean, all just check marks for what makes a classic Primus record. It's on Pork Soda, and it's on here as well. It's just less dark. And I feel like if you're going to have one record to maybe start with in the Primus catalog, it's either Sailing the Seas of Cheese or Frizzle Fry, depending on your flair for production. If you like cleaner production and your rock music, at least cleaner than Frizzle Fry, start with Sailing the Seas of Cheese. It's essential listening if you like funk, if you like rock, if you like sort of weird prog, if you like weird rock, and you've never listened to Primus, you've never listened to Sailing the Seas of Cheese, do it. It is a quintessential record in that lane. I love this album. You know, it's one of those that just kept me coming back. I like the solo work on here a lot, especially on those Damn Blue Collar Tweakers. I love Larry's guitars on that song. I feel like that's one of his best guitar performances because it has that drone, but he does a lot with it, especially in a live setting. You know, and I feel like this is a good just sort of record for them to cement themselves as greats in what they do. You know, it's not my favorite, but it's one of. It's a close second race to
Spotty type children.
Frizzle Fry. This record is magical. You know, growing up, and I think one of the reasons why I really love Primus is they are a band like Metallica that I grew up with. The only reason why I've still latched on to Primus so heavily is because I love Les's songwriting. I've tried to make a point of that throughout this entire review, but I love a lot of his songwriting on here. You know, I like his character pieces. I like his use of writing character pieces. I think it's really cool that a guy just does that. You know, I like his tributes to the ocean as well, because I like fish, I like the ocean, I think it's cool. But it's all in its tightest on Frizzle Fry, and that's why I feel like it is a good starting point with Sailing the Seas of Cheese. If you don't mind some raw production, because the production on this record is a lot more raw than Sailing the Seas of Cheese. But if you like some heavier leaning music, I would start with Frizzle Fry. You know, they have not only a tribute to their live album that they did in 1989, Suck on This, and a tribute to Rush at the same time by starting the record with YYZ's intro, because that's how they started their live record, was sort of a sort of small little intro of YYZ before exploding into their first song. They tease that on this before jumping into the Defy the Laws of Tradition. It has all of the checklist for a perfect Primus record, but it's so tight. It's a tight-ass record, man. I like tracks like Spaghetti Western, where they just have this groove, and Les is just talking over this groove. It's a cool-ass idea that I think they do really well. I like Toys Go Winding Down. I love the bass gallops on that song. I love John the Fisherman. That's another classic Primus jam. Too Many Puppies, an anti-war track, done really, really well. The Allegory of Soldiers to Puppies, I really like. Mr. Know-It-All is a track I listened to a lot growing up. This song, Mr. Know-It-All, is like a song my mom would listen to all the time when I was a kid, because my mom loves Primus. That's another reason why I think I like Primus so much, is because it's just one of those bands that my mom really loved, and she listened to a lot, and I, through osmosis, audible osmosis, listened to a lot as well. And so I have a lot of nostalgia for tracks that in their catalog, but I also think they're really, really good jams. The drums in this record fucking slay. They are awesome. And I like a lot of the grooves on here. I love the guitar crunch that's on here as well. That's one of the reasons why I like this record a lot. The crunch on the guitars, when they really get into their grooves, hit so much harder because of the production. I like a lot of this. I think this record's perfect. I think it's another perfect record where the band just kicked the door down in the best way possible with all the ideas that they would lay the groundwork, and become the foundation for their career to come. Yeah, I don't know. I love this record a lot. I think it's another quintessential record. It's one of my favorite funk records ever. If you could just throw it into the funk realm, because Les's bass work is really cool on here. He rattles in some cool ways, and I like the writing. Again, the writing is great. You know, to defy the laws of tradition as well. Just sort of talking about subversion of culture. It's well penned track. Is good. Is a classic, and that's my Primus discography review. What did you think about it? Did you like it? If you did, be sure to give it a like. And let me know what you thought about it in the comments down below. If you want to see more of my music, gaming, and general nerdy content, be sure to subscribe. Special thanks to my patrons if you want to join their ranks to get early access to content, exclusive content, like the extended cut of this review that dropped last year, or to help drive the community. It's linked in the description. I'm going to get out of here. I've been Viral Rack. You guys have a good day's laughing situations, and I'll see you another day.